Hello and welcome to Keeping It Real. I'm Joy and I'm your host. And thank you for being here and listening in on this presentation. And we're going to be talking about the Tartarian history a little bit. And I'm going to be showing some images that are going to totally captivate your mind and your thoughts and just open those thoughts up and get you really thinking about our history and what we've been taught in school from a young age in our history books, and just the massive amount of government cover-ups that have been going on for a very long time. And, you know, the Bible gives us a lot of information, and for those who really seek the truth, God will open your eyes and your ears to hear and your hearts to those truths. And through scripture, I have found that what we actually are seeing today, and myself speaking as a Christian who has done a lot of research in the last 5 years, there's a few others besides myself. I'm not alone in some of my research. What we have discovered is that these things that are coming to light, that are being uncovered, and the Tartarian history, which I'm going to speak more of and give you some detailed information about, really fits with God's truths and the narratives that are told in the scriptures. And the truth is all around us if we just take the time to take a breath, not be in a rush, pay attention to those things that seem to capture your attention for the moment, or your eyes for the moment, such as walking in a building that looks really beautiful and full of marble and just, eye-capturing. Thought capturing. Well, don't just stop there and let it go. Do a little bit of research and you'll find that there's a narrative behind that building story and history that's being told to us that does not fit into what we're seeing. And once that transition takes place and you start to uncover the lies and the hidden truth, you're just going to be hungry for more. And I'm going to start the video with Proverbs 20:12. Ears that hear and eyes that see. The Lord has made them both. Do not love sleep or you will grow poor. Open your eyes and you will have plenty of food. Also, looking at the photo, the image in front of your screen, you see this gigantic bell made of metals. I'm not sure what kind, but you also see these men in front that appear to be French, probably by what they're wearing, maybe 17th, 18th century. You also see some buildings in the background that look some Romanistic, because you're seeing some columns, but you're also seeing some spires on the rooftops that look like they're from antiquity. And I'll talk more about that in these upcoming images, because I'm going to show you what we believe those are being used for, or what they were being used for during a different time and place. So let's jump into our next set of images. And here I'm going to be discussing this photo, which is actually in the hometown where I live. This was taken in the 1800s. And it is a image of Fresno, where I live, which is in California, the Central Valley. And in the background, straight towards the back, is our courthouse, a large domed, columned courthouse. We also see the spires on the top of these buildings that you're looking at. We call these antiquitex, that go back to a time where we believe the people were gathering energy from ether from the atmosphere, and that was being harvested and created into electricity for homes, buildings, etc. And we'll talk more about that. And again, later repurposed. Most of those have been removed, and as I will show you in some of these upcoming images. And, now nothing is free, certainly not energy. And we have an idea of how they were able to repurpose that, which I'll talk about. So let's go to the next image, and we see this is a mansion that is called Kearney Mansion, which is also in Fresno where I live. I think sometimes the best place to start is your own hometown. You're going to find a lot of things there that might, open up your conscience to what the real truth is there if you take a second look and just take the time to research a little. On top of this building, this mansion, you see these spires again, probably providing the electricity for this particular mansion. It was probably a home. Maybe it was a power plant. Could have been. This is the Tower Theater, which is close to where I live. And again, we see a tower, and we see a metal-looking device on the top. That this has been repurposed, of course, but probably at one time collecting free energy, ether from the atmosphere. This is during the 18th century. These are Mexicans that lived near Fresno. Just an image to kind of give you an idea of some of the conditions people were living in during that time frame. And here is a building being demolished in Fresno. Looks like a tunnel entrance there. You can see some brick around the entrance of the opening. As we find many of these structures being demolished, like our Capitol Courthouse here, that had been demolished in the 1930s, I believe, 1920s to 30s. They demolished this building, and why? I think the reason is if they cannot find a narrative to fit the story that they're putting out for a particular building such as this, then they just take it down or it's repurposed. And then it looks like this, which is how it looks today. Totally ugly, much smaller. But the narrative that was given to us is they needed to tear it down, even though it was built in the late 1800s, the one you just seen, which is this one, built to house government, or people working for the government, people working in the courthouse like you would see today, and that they didn't have enough room and they had to expand, so they tore it down. So it wasn't even 50 years old. So how do you figure? There's another picture. This was in 1884. And again, that structure looks much older than what it even appears in the picture there. You do see the spires on the top. This is my daughter's school, Fresno High. And in 1928, the narrative tells us it was a building that was open for high school, which is, again, what it is today. But yet, here is the picture that goes back a little further, and it doesn't look anything like it does today. I think some of the building structure from the bottom half is still there, and a few columns that were added, but this looks more like a home for somebody from a previous time. And again, not what the narrative tells us it was open for, but again, repurposed is what we call it. This is the courthouse again for Fresno, and the fountain that you see in the front is actually still there, which I am very surprised they left that intact and didn't remove it. But most people just walk by, don't pay attention, as I have done many and many a times going to court, never really paying quite much attention to that other than it was pretty, but the thought never went beyond that. And again, you see the dome in the background, and this was supposedly built in the 1800s. So you have to figure horse and buggy, how did they even position that dome on the very top? There wasn't much machinery at that time. As you know, here's a church, cathedral type church that is also located in Fresno. Again, built in the 1800s. And my previous video was on cathedrals, which I showed that were all over the U.S. And my next video will be showing the remaining all over the rest of our world, which are in every continent. These massive cathedrals with these massive spires. Most of them have been repurposed to cathedrals, and you see the little crosses on the very top of the spires, but they did leave some. There's a few that we can see where these were probably, again, power generating plants that created the energy for electricity for the businesses and so forth, probably within a city. So this one is also Fresno. And in the background, you could see our courthouse way back there with its dome top. And this is supposed to be our civic center, which is nothing in comparison to how it looks today. The massive columned building, Romanesque looking buildings that you see here are very old world and what you would see in other parts of the world. Usually the narrative is given to us that these were built by the Romans, but Lord knows we didn't have Romans wandering around in the United States of America during a time where we supposedly had been given a story of Columbus and Indians being here and early pilgrims and so forth. But yet again, the narrative that's been given is not what we're seeing in these images. And again, this one here, you could see the Capitol building in the background. You see the Antiquitech. And we must question these narratives very closely, because this is Fresno, this is where I live, this is downtown, and doesn't look anything like it does today. And why were these structures, if they were built in the 1800s and they're very beautiful, obviously, built, torn down and repurposed, is the question, when there was nothing wrong with them. And again, you don't see any vehicles, motorized vehicles or anything like that. Horse and buggy, a muddy dirt road, which would be appropriate during that time. But you wonder how it is that they were able to even build and construct such magnificent buildings of that time. So we're going to go on to the next images, which I'm going to talk about state capitol buildings, which you're going to find very interesting, which this building and the image looks very similar to our courthouse that we once had here in Fresno. This one's actually in Florida, but you're going to find a pattern here that is reflective of all the state capitals within the United States and actually abroad, around the world. Most of these buildings within a country capital, state capital, are going to look very similar to what you're seeing here up on these images. This one here is Alabama, and this was, most of them will say founded. If you go to Wiki, you can get some of the background history. But again, it's a false history. It's a false narrative that they're feeding us because it's not reflective of what we're seeing in these images. And I notice that they always use the word founded. And some of them, they will say, were burned in a fire and they were rebuilt, or, like our courthouse building in Fresno, they expanded it, and rebuilt it, which does not make sense because apparently if these were built, let's even say in the 1700s, which almost would be unimaginable, but 1800s would seem impossible again. So they built them all in the same time frame when some of the states hadn't even been formed yet. It's kind of crazy. Here we're looking at Sacramento. And if you notice, you'll see in comparison these people below at the steps here are very small, like grasshoppers. Where did I hear that at? Anyway, in comparison to this giant structure you're looking at, which is our Sacramento Capitol building with the large dome on top again. This one here is Colorado. Again, founded in the 1800s. This one looks to be a lot older to me. Again, we have the golden dome top. And you have to picture, horse and buggy. Even if they went back as far as the 1700s, how would they be able to lift and place that dome on the top? Or even constructing such a magnificent feat with all the concrete and brick, is hard to imagine without having the type of machineries and cranes and things that we have today, which would still be difficult. We don't see these types of structures today, that's for sure. This one is Connecticut. And again, this one's founded in the 1800s. This one looks more of a castle type structure and probably was at one time, from a previous time, a previous people, a different earth. And again, you see the spires, the Antiquitech that's on the top, which obviously these were left on and not repurposed or removed. And you could see that these look like little antenna type devices that are on the top, like what you would see on top of a home, in the 1940s and 30s and 40s, 50s, where they used antennas because they weren't using cable and silver and wireless technology. But again, these were like some of the Tesla energy devices to me, gathering ether and energy from the atmosphere. Here's another one, Indianapolis, founded in 1800s. Massive and very old, very ancient. And some of these buildings, like the Texas Capitol building, which the story tells us was founded in 1882 from Wikipedia, housing over 700 rooms, which I think back in that time, they'd be lucky if they had the population at 700, but yet they're building a structure like this for a government building. A little bit crazy. Maybe they were thinking ahead of time. Georgia State Capitol building, 1880 it was founded. And this one again, several floors. And I believe this one goes down a little bit deeper. Mud flood. Golden top, and the Antiquitech spire on the top of the dome. Illinois, 1887. And again, these are all in the United States, and the narrative is they were built all in the 1800s. Some, I go back some early, I think there was one or two that were in the early, which I'm not going to go through every state capital, but you can be assured that all of them are very similar to this, if not identical. and built some before the state was even formed. Okay, you know, which is contradictory to what they're telling you. Not sure this one. I think Arkansas, but Idaho, 1905. And this one looks much, much older. And the dome, you see the windows. And again, these probably back in a different time and place were used as maybe an energy generator, you know, on a larger scale, creating more energy for, you know, a bigger city, possibly. That's a thought. Michigan State Capitol. Absolutely stunning, magnificent. This one's really interesting. This is New York and founded in 1867. This one looks more like a castle to me, which we find around the world in different places, especially over in Europe. You see a lot of these castle-like structures. Some of them, they say, are built in the 12th century and 13th century that look almost identical. But that would be impossible, right? Because we weren't here in the U.S. during that time. I think it was the Indians that were here. And maybe a few giants, right? And again, this is our state capital of California, Sacramento. And the narrative out of Wiki is giving us a narrative here stating the structure was completed between 1800 or 1860 and 1874. Okay, but yet you're looking at this building, which looks like it has the windows blown out of it. It looks a lot older, but yet the trees surrounding it and the areas are mature. So it couldn't be being, you know, under construction. Yet you see a kind of a, I don't know, a wooden beam or something coming out of it, reaching to the top of the dome entrance. Maybe they were working on it, you know, fixing it up, resurfacing it, putting in windows to a structure that was obviously and clearly already there. Our Washington State Capitol building, and this one's interesting. I'm sure this goes back to the 18th century because we see the horse and buggy on the left-hand side of the image in the front, parked right there. But yet we see paved roads and a sidewalk, which we seen some of this in the older world, the older civilization before the cataclysm or polar shift. We see brick roads, we see paved roads, just as we're seeing these types of capitol buildings built with brick and cement that and large domes, obviously. So it would not be out of the realm for them to also build roads that were paved, because believe it or not, in some of my future videos I will be showing you some images of some vehicles that existed back before this time that we're in, that were running off of electricity. They were electric. They were not running off of a battery, by the way. And so that means that there was energy that was being generated to allow these cars to run, and scooters and motorbikes. Just like if any of you are familiar with Tesla and some of his his technology that he supposedly, which we don't even know now if that was a man that they just attributed some of the technology to and later covered up, if he was actually a real scientist or not. But nevertheless, he could have founded it, I guess. But it's a lot similar to the technology that he was demonstrating during his lifetime, is what I'm trying to say. So if there was in fact electric vehicles during the time before when these buildings were in existence, then it would not be out of the realm for them to have created roads for the vehicles to travel instead of the mud roads that dirt roads that we would have had during the horse and buggy days. So we're going to go into our next slide presentation. And I'm going to start with this picture here, which basically is a good example of a time that goes back even further. We have different cycles of these catastrophes. And again, I don't want to put too much time into that because I'm short on time here and I don't want to cram too much information into one video. And I want to be able to really explain all that to you in more detail. But throughout these different catastrophe cycles, such as the polar reversals, we also have magnetic pole changes, which disrupt the Earth, but the reversals are catastrophic. And when I say reversals, that means, yes, the poles actually reverse themselves, and it causes water and from the oceans to come up over the continents and totally cover them and what we call mud flood them. And it causes a lot of damage. It buries buildings, large structures, and it carries, animals and debris hundreds and hundreds of miles from its original place. This goes back to the Ice Age. You can find even now megalithic, or not megalithic, but yeah, structures that had been covered, like in Machu Picchu in Peru. You see a lot of megalithic sites that had been covered in mud at one time, and yet inside the debris there's seashells and sediment that comes from the ocean, because that tells us that the ocean waters covered that area at one time. And it had to have been very catastrophic because a lot of the structures, the megalithic stones and so forth, and walls were just strewn all over the place. You go back even further to the ice ages, and you have different type of catastrophe happening, which again is cynical, which happens over and over again throughout time. And we have prehistoric events happening where animals, going back even to the dinosaurs, and then we have the Cretaceous period where we have mammoths and even horses and fox and so forth that are buried in muck, frozen ice, that today are in thawing, and they're finding that they were carried from the original place they were grazing, such as a large mammoth, for instance, would have been grazing in one part of the earth, and then he's found hundreds of miles away where he was carried by these waters that were pouring over the continents, and that was on a larger scale catastrophe, which again I will talk in more detail about. But let's get back to our photos here. This is a good example. You see some structures in the background that they're still digging out, which aren't as huge as the structure you see here that's more Romanistic of that time frame, probably before. That is when we probably had the larger giants, not our titans, but our giants during a time. And here we see another image of antiquity. That's harvesting energy, is what it looks like in the image. The ladder going there, probably they're removing it, repurposing again, hiding information. And I'm going to close this video with this picture here. Wait, there was another photo I wanted to show you, and I'll get back to this one here. Let's see, which is these buildings here. which I almost skipped over. But this one here is, again, a good example of an older structure. And behind it on the right, you see a domed building that looks like it had already been re-facaded, to make it look and appear like it was just, built not that long ago. Which it probably appeared like this one that we're looking at in the front at one time. But they hadn't re-facaded that one yet, or this one here that we're looking at, and still digging it out of the mud. Or they're probably going to demolish it and repurpose it, build something else, who knows. But that's a good example of a mud flood building. This is another one. Again, you can see that there was a buggy here. It looks like it was on the left-hand side of the screen, carrying brick, or, taking brick from, looks like a damaged wall, probably from, again, a polar shift from a previous time. And you look at the castle in the back. Wow. With the Antiquitech spires on the top. And you can probably guess what those were being used for. And certainly not in the 1800s was that building being constructed. This is in Utah, and again, this is one of the cathedrals there that were supposedly built by the Mormons, who apparently, were migrating there in small groups during the 1700s because they were, and the 1800s because they were thrown out of New York and Pennsylvania, and so they ended up in Utah, where they started supposedly building these massive cathedrals. And again, horse and buggy days. It looks like some construction on the top there going on. Hard to tell. Again, re-facading the structure that was probably more than likely already there, and we're just given a different narrative, which you can never find the original construction pictures, which I find absolutely true of what it is that is being pushed towards us, as opposed to the narratives that are given. This is a good example of a mud flood building today, and what I see in my downtown area. We see this everywhere. And again, you see a sidewalk, you see a road, you see people walking by, not giving much attention to why in the heck would they build a building with the other part of the window covered up and buried underneath the sidewalk. Well, they would do that if they didn't dig out the entire building and they decided it was too much work and we'll just cover it up with a sidewalk. So that would make more sense, especially if the building was already there. Certainly, again, solid concrete and stone, marble. Are we going to find that this was built in a time frame that was given? When we go back to Egypt, you can see, this was a time that goes back even further. The time of the pyramids, again, a different people, a different cycle, and more than likely we had giants on the earth during this time frame, which the Bible talks about. And again, that'll be in my future video. And I'm going to close with that. And if you like the video, please subscribe so you can be notified when the next video is released. And please like if you like what you just viewed. And with that, I will say goodbye and God bless.